You know, it's too bad this didn't get released a few months earlier, because then we would have gotten the Falcon and the Winter Soldier in the winter. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Now that all 6 episodes of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier are out, today we're going to stop and talk about the show as a whole. So let me know in the comments what your thoughts on The Falcon and the Winter Soldier were, if you already saw it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my channel out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. But let's jump right into it and let's talk about The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This stars Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan, reprising their roles as Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes, respectively. Following the events of Avengers Endgame, they team up in a global adventure that tests their abilities and their patience. So, similar to my review of WandaVision, I'm going to run through this episode by episode, meaning that I will be getting into full spoiler territory for the entire show. So, if you haven't seen The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, this is your spoiler warning. Go watch the show, then come back to this. But anyway, here we go. This was created by Malcolm Spellman, who previously worked on the show Empire, and who also co-wrote the first and last episodes, though every episode was directed by Kari Skogland, who has an extensive TV career, directing various episodes of shows like The Walking Dead, Vikings, and Boardwalk Empire, among many others. And like what WandaVision did for those 2 title characters, and what some of these other Disney Plus series are doing, we're getting 2 characters who are introduced as supporting roles for other heroes, and now front and center for their own story for the first time. Which I'm happy to see, especially in this case with one of the leads being Anthony Mackie, who does get a fair amount of starring roles, but at the same time isn't as appreciated for how good of a leading man he can be. If you need an example of a great recent effort by his, go watch Synchronic. He's phenomenal in that. Though with this being only the second ever MCU show counted as part of a phase, this has been getting a lot of comparisons to WandaVision, despite the fact that it's a totally different type of show. I'd like to not make my whole review be a comparison between the two, but there are a few qualities that I think both shows shared that worked for one and not the other, and I will bring those up while still judging this on its own merits. So the first episode, New World Order, takes place 6 months after the blip and sees both Sam and Bucky attempting to adjust to life after both being gone for 5 years. While the show opened with a bang, showing Sam in action stopping a terrorist group, the episode slows down considerably afterwards and opts to strictly focus on character-based moments. We see Bucky going to therapy and trying to undo the years of brainwashing as the Winter Soldier, while we see Sam giving up the Captain America shield and opting to help out his sister Sarah, played by Adepero Oduye, as she tries to keep their family business going, though still experiencing the harsh realities of soulless corporate culture, despite his status as a superhero. We also get introduced to characters like John Walker, played by Wyatt Russell, who gets chosen to be the new Captain America, along with the terrorist group known as the Flag Smashers, and more on both of them in a bit. This was definitely a slower paced opening, but I thought it wasn't bad, and I do like the emphasis placed on character moments over action, outside of really the opening. It was reminiscent of the feel of the Marvel Netflix shows, which took on an overall more serious approach, which the MCU isn't generally known for. And while with any other show, setting up an overly depressing tone might run the risk of turning people off, with Marvel, as I said in my review of WandaVision, they are able to slide with stuff like that more than anyone else due to the trust they built up with their viewers over the years. Plus, we've had plenty of other movies where we established more of a connection with both Sam and Bucky, so it's not like we had to establish their characters first or anything. We can jump into some of this darker material right away, and it will still be compelling because we've grown to like them from other projects. So, while this was a slower paced opening, I was intrigued to see where this would go. However, we run into an issue where what we get following this is a lot of more of the same, and the material becomes very hit and miss as a result. Episode 2, The Star-Spangled Man, does show Walker become a celebrity as the new Captain America, and sets up a lot of the tension between him and his partner Lamar, played by Clay Bennett, and Sam and Bucky, which I do think was one of the better storylines here. It was a very personal conflict, with Sam, who was handpicked to be the new Captain America by Steve Rogers, repeatedly butting heads with someone who was simply handpicked by the government and has clearly this loathsome personality. Now, I've heard some people complain about Wyatt Russell's performance in this series as a whole, finding him to be unlikable, but this goes to show that Russell, who is actually a very good actor if you go and watch movies like Overlord and Ingrid Goes West, was just that effective in his role. Because he plays Walker, a guy who's essentially a puppet yet becomes increasingly more arrogant, the way he should, as this very aggravating guy with a very distinct personality that we can enjoy not liking. Now, while he does have qualities that show he actually does care, and it's just his arrogance and headstrong nature misplacing that, he's still not meant to really be seen as a protagonist. We're supposed to enjoy not liking him, even if he isn't an outright villain necessarily. I thought that was done really well in this series as a whole. Now, the rest of this episode, as I said, is paced mostly the same as the first, still feeling more like setup than anything. There's still this very grim, methodical pace to the show outside of the Walker conflict, and it doesn't feel like there's a sense of urgency in a way, as we're now 2 episodes in, and we've yet to learn much about the Flag Smashers, nor do they make a huge impression on us, even though they're supposed to be the main villains of the show. We do get introduced to their leader, Carly, played by Erin Kellyman, but we don't get much about her either. And while it's good if you want to build up a little bit of that mystery, my thing was we needed something whenever we did see them to really capture our attention and have them stick out. Yet outside of some exposition telling us what some of their motivations were, which were interesting to explore being that they thought life was better during the blip, whenever we saw them, they just felt like your average run-of-the-mill bad guys, rather than the truly intriguing, morally complex villains seen in other Marvel productions, especially in recent years. It didn't feel like they really had much of a personality, other than that they were very serious and said things at all times in a very straight-faced way. I wanted more from them, though the only interesting thing that arises from this conflict is that we find out they're also super soldiers, which leads to Sam and Bucky finding a man named Isaiah Bradley, played by Carl Lumbly, and he's an older man who was given the super soldier serum and experimented on by the US government for 30 years, and he and Sam get into an argument over the existence of black superheroes. As far as this, all I'll say is, it's a shame that Bradley is only kept as a guest character, because his storyline was far more interesting than anything involving the Flag Smashers, and Carl Lumbly's performance was easily one of the best things about this series as a whole. Moving right along though, episode 3, called Power Broker, sees the return of Daniel Bruhl as Zemo, who's used to get information on the Flag Smashers, along with Emily Van Camp as Sharon Carter, who's been living as a fugitive since Civil War. Also, as the title suggests, this is the first we hear of a mysterious figure called the Power Broker, who runs a criminal sanctuary city-state known as Madripoor. This was a slight improvement over the second episode, as it's a little more action-packed and a little more humorous here, due to the interactions among Sam, Bucky, and Zemo. Though before you start typing away in the comments about how all I care about is the action or anything, and I can't appreciate the more serious nature of the other episodes, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that I do want to feel more than one emotion when watching either a show or a movie, and for those first couple of episodes, the slower pacing, while allowing us to hit some noteworthy themes that do need to be discussed, have left us feeling nothing but down this entire time, and it feels like there's not much of a balance with anything else. Nor was it doing much else to really hook us in or grab our attention. On top of that, we've yet to feel any sense of urgency in this show as a whole, which is a problem that carries over to this third episode. This yet again feels like just more setup, where we learn of other people involved in the grand scheme of things, and names get dropped, and more characters get introduced, with the end of the episode bringing back Florence Kasumba as Io from Wakanda. Yet this has yet to give us a hook where we really feel like the stakes are a little higher, and it feels like the show's attention is being pulled in a lot of different directions here. And around this time, I did hear some criticism saying, well, WandaVision took till this time to really get into that central conflict, so what's the difference here? Well, for one thing, WandaVision was only a third of the way through at episode 3. This, on the other hand, is only 6 episodes in total, meaning that it's now at the halfway point and we still don't fully have a grasp on what this is ultimately going for. I also did say in my review of WandaVision that had they left us in the dark for even just one more episode, then it would have been a big problem, as people were already starting to get a little antsy by episode 3 for things to get moving along. So it's not like that there wasn't criticism directed towards that show too. But it is more noticeable with Falcon and Winter Soldier because of one major difference. WandaVision, while taking its time at first, started off by offering us something that was unlike anything else we've gotten in the MCU by that point. And there was this immediate sense of mystery and intrigue as to how this bizarre sitcom world came to be. Falcon and Winter Soldier, at its core, feels basically just like your average MCU production. Specifically, it reminded me a lot of Captain America the Winter Soldier, just without Steve Rogers. While this hits entirely different themes from that movie, my point is that the tone and aesthetic feel similar, and it's not hooking you in with something that feels like its own thing. So you have a show that, while thematically solid, has a somewhat derivative aesthetic, has no clear overarching narrative, no compelling villain, lacks the fun of other MCU projects, as well as an overall lack of urgency. And it's not like those themes are always front and center at all times of each episode. And it's now the halfway point with only 3 episodes to go. And if you're someone who loved the show and didn't feel this way by this point, then great. I'm not here to say that you were wrong or anything. But you see where some people's frustrations may lie. And I'm not even saying by this point that the show's bad. I'm just saying that it's not on that same level as other Marvel productions. It's not as balanced, nor is it as focused. And when it works, it's great. But that wasn't always the case. Now, I'm still conflicted as to whether this should have been cut down to a movie so that the pacing felt tighter, or should it have been extended to a few more episodes so it can flesh things out a little more. I'm not entirely sure, but it may be able to go either way, in my view. Though thankfully, we finally get somewhere with episode 4, called The Whole World Is Watching, which was easily the best episode in the entire show. This was the high point for me. Things felt like they were starting to come together a bit as paths began to cross, mainly where the Walker conflict and Flag Smasher conflict both really come to a head, as well as the conflict between the Wakandans and Zemo. We do finally learn a little more about Carly, who at this point has been otherwise severely underdeveloped, as we see her at a memorial service for her adoptive mother, and we get some reasoning behind why she and the Flag Smashers thought life was better under the blip, as everyone felt more united, and when everyone was returned 5 years later, people were forcibly displaced from their homes by the government. And we finally see a turning point for Walker, who goes from simply just being arrogant to really despicable as he gets impatient while Sam attempts to reason with Carly, leading to a number of fights that ends with her accidentally killing Lamar, and in turn, Walker killing one of her men out of anger, which is then filmed by a bunch of bystanders. Easily the most gripping, emotional moment of the show, as now it feels like something happened where there are severe consequences, and we finally get a little more insight into how Carly can be, humanizing her a bit, though still showing how personal she can get when resorting to extreme measures, such as when she uses Sam's sister as a way to lure him into a meeting. That's showing us inklings of a more three-dimensional villain, and makes for solid writing overall. Now, the 5th episode, called Truth, doesn't quite hit those emotional peaks as high, definitely taking a bit of a step back in terms of intensity, but it's still pretty intriguing overall, as it deals mainly with the fallout from the last episode. Walker is stripped of his Captain America title, Zemo's handed over to the Wakandans, and Sam begins training with the Captain America shield himself, agreeing with Bucky to move forward and work together more closely. We also get introduced to Julia Louis-Dreyfus as Val, who meets up with Walker and tells him that she'll be in contact with him in the future. Now, Dreyfus's role was teased when it was said there was going to be a huge cameo in the lead up to this episode, and while she doesn't really do much here, it's worth noting she is the biggest name being introduced this late in the game. And between this and the final episode, more on that in a minute, this is clearly setting her up to have a much bigger role in the MCU as a whole, in the vein of a Nick Fury-style character. We also get the reappearance of Isaiah Bradley, who reveals more of his backstory to Sam, saying how he was imprisoned after rescuing other soldiers who were experimented on in what was easily the episode's most compelling moment. On the other hand, once again, after finally getting some character development, the Flag Smashers are back to being reduced to an afterthought here, killing the momentum built up in that last episode, with their role here acting as setup. Things are set in motion for the final confrontation with them as they plan to attack a conference in New York, while we get a mid-credits scene of Walker building his own shield. Now, as for that last episode, called One World, One People, I'll be upfront and say that this does once again share something notable with WandaVision, and that's that both shows don't end on as strong of a note as they should have. Going back to my note earlier about whether this should have either been a movie or extended by a few episodes, this is what has me leaning towards the latter, because the way this resolves most of its conflicts doesn't feel totally earned. As I've been saying through this whole review, outside of that 4th episode, Carly felt like an afterthought for this entire show. So when she dies here, honestly, I felt very little. Erin Kellyman did fine with the role overall. It wasn't like she was bad, but this was a villain who had some interesting motivations that do have some basis in current events, but she was rarely given the chance to expand upon things like her worldview, her motivations, or anything. She was mostly seen just setting up the next part of her plan and occasionally jumping in on the action. So, like I said, she, along with the Flag Smashers as a whole, just come off like your generic villains. And that whole conflict winds up being resolved, with Sam making this big motivational speech in front of a few senators, trying to explain Carly's view to them, and the way that's wrapped up, while meant as feel-good and inspirational, comes off as a bit too neat, mainly stemming from the show's overall pacing. It was clearly touching upon a much more complex issue, and the fact that it's resolved with a speech just felt off. Along with this, Sam also gets a memorial dedicated to Bradley in the Captain America Museum, which is a nice gesture. I just feel that the fact that a guy who had his life ruined because of some government experiment should have maybe gotten something more material than just a memorial, and there should have been bigger consequences for this. Just saying. And while Sebastian Stan was solid all throughout this, even Bucky's storyline felt wrapped up a little too neatly. While he had a strong performance throughout the entire show, his actual arc didn't feel fully fleshed out, that being the trauma that he suffered as a result of being the Winter Soldier, and the pain he caused others during that time. His role is mainly reduced to bickering with everyone else, and when we do circle back to the PTSD he suffers, it feels like it's brushed off a bit too quickly. Though the most egregious thing is we get this completely unearned reveal that Sharon Carter, another character who felt like an afterthought all throughout the show, is the power broker, with that reveal coming right before she kills Carly. And I gotta tell you, that was really frustrating. Not because of the actual reveal itself, but the fact that it just comes totally out of nowhere, and it felt like it was thrown in as a plot twist done for the sake of a plot twist, as it's nothing that's even remotely hinted at beforehand. They set her character up in the mid-credit sequence in a way that's implied she's going to have a much bigger role in the MCU moving forward. All I can say is, if she's going to be one of the main villains in Phase 4 or something, they really need to work more on her character development and flesh out her motivations big time, because I felt no sense of excitement whatsoever as far as what's to come with her. However, I am much more excited with where they go with John Walker, truth be told, as his storyline ends with him reconvening with Julia Louis-Dreyfus at the end of the episode, and he becomes U.S. Agent, which is the same path his character goes down in the comics, who's not exactly an outright villain, but just someone who seems to get in the way of Captain America repeatedly. Based on what I read, correct me if I'm wrong there. Either way, I'm looking forward to what they do with him, especially because I thought Russell was one of the better parts of this show overall. And we'll see what happens with Sam and Bucky moving forward, with the show ending with the change from the Falcon and the Winter Soldier to Captain America and the Winter Soldier. It's been announced that a Captain America 4 is in the works, with Mackie in the lead, with Malcolm Spellman co-writing the script, though I'm going to approach that with a bit of caution because honestly, I found this to be one of the weaker MCU projects overall. I don't dislike the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but it's easily one of the most uneven MCU projects in a very long time. This either needed to be a movie so that it can tighten up its pacing, or be expanded to a few more episodes so that the storylines were better fleshed out and felt more emotionally compelling. While the action scenes were solid, the performances were good, and it hit some strong themes, it didn't always feel like there was a sense of urgency, going off in way too many directions, leading to some storylines being severely underdeveloped, others being wrapped up too neatly, and one of the most poorly written villains in quite some time. It's not a bad show overall, but it wasn't great either. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier gets a 6.5 out of 10. So let me know, did you see The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like this more than WandaVision? Are you looking forward to Captain America 4? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.